Good morning. My name is Dr. Karen Philbrick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. We are a university transportation center that leads 3 multi-university competitively selected consortia. The first is the Mineta Consortium for Transportation Mobility, funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation. The second is the California State University Transportation Consortium, funded by the 2017 Road Repair and Accountability Act in California, also known as Senate Bill 1. And finally, we lead the Extreme Events and Training and Research Program funded by the Federal Railroad Administration. Through all of our work, we focus on improving the mobility of people and goods, and we are dedicated to improving the safety, efficiency, convenience, and accessibility of our nation's transportation systems. To that end, we take our work very, very seriously, and we focus on the values of accountability, diversity, equity, integrity, and of course, sustainability. Today, we discuss truly a tragedy, and that is human trafficking, which is the fastest growing organized crime with $150 billion in annual profits. And unfortunately, transportation is often a part of trafficking as perpetrators rely on our network to recruit, move, or transfer victims, or to bring goods from forced labor to market. Fortunately, however, that means we have a strong opportunity to put a stop to these crimes. Our industry plays a critical role in preventing and combating human trafficking, as well as providing access for many survivors trying to leave their trafficking situations and obtain the aid necessary to rebuild their lives. As one of Caltrans Safety Awareness Week training sessions, today's webinar adds to that effort. So let's move into our panel, which includes, in alphabetical order for ease of introduction, 5 outstanding professionals. First, we're joined by Mr. Paul Chang. Please wave when I say your name. He's the Regional Anti-Human Trafficking Coordinator at the U.S. Department of Labor in the Wage and Hour Division. He has over 28 years with this agency, and he has developed numerous training materials and programs that focus on strategic approaches to prosecution, protection, and importantly, prevention of forced labor. Thank you so much for being here, Paul. Next, we have Evelyn Chumbo. She is a survivor advocate and the operations manager at Human Trafficking Legal Center. She was appointed by President Obama to serve on the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking, and as a survivor of child labor trafficking, she has testified before several government agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Evelyn, we're so happy you're here today. Thank you for making the time. We also have Mr. Aston Green, who's the Chief of System Safety and Security at the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority. For those of you in the Bay Area, that's also known as VTA. Previously, he served as Interim Chief of Metro System Security and Law Enforcement at Los Angeles Metro and Major Commander at the MARTA Police and Emergency Management in Atlanta, Georgia. Aston brings a wealth of knowledge and more than 20 years of experience in the transit industry, where he's directed his energy at directing and managing transit system security and law enforcement operations, program management, community outreach, and technology development. You wear a lot of hats, Aston, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you. We also have my dear friend, Polly Hansen, who's the Senior Director of Security, Risk, and Emergency Management at the American Public Transportation Association, better known as APTA. In her current role, she coordinates APTA stakeholders to develop transit security, risk, and emergency management standards and policies. Previously, she was the Chief of Police for Amtrak, where she led a national police department responsible for protecting over 30 million passengers and 20,000 employees. A force to be reckoned with, she also served as the Chief of Metro Transit Police in DC. Polly, you're outstanding. Can't wait to hear what you have to say. Thanks for being here. Finally, rounding out this panel of experts is our own Dr. Kezban Yachki-Sokot. She's an MTI Research Associate and an Assistant Professor of Business Analytics at San Jose State University. Her research focuses on using decision analytics and management science to alleviate human suffering in the areas of human trafficking, humanitarian logistics, and public health. Dr. Kesban, thanks for being here. Okay, we're going to get right into it because we've had a lot of questions submitted in advance of our gathering today. But to set the stage for this robust discussion, we're going to begin with each panelist taking just 2 minutes to respond to the question of how their work relates to trafficking. I'll call on each of you in turn, but let's start with you, Paul. Please talk to us about how your work relates to this topic.
Thank you so much, Karen, and hello, everyone. The U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division basically enforces the nation's most comprehensive labor laws. That includes the minimum wage, overtime, child labor, as well as family medical leave, some of the immigration work visa programs, including the Migrant Seasonal Worker Protection Act, as well as other acts that even puts us in direct enforcement with transportation safety in transportation fields. Most of our investigators are frontline investigators. We are a civil law enforcement agency, which means we don't put anybody to jail, but we are the first ones to often detect trafficking situations. Oftentimes when you see labor conditions that are very horrible, it is usually a sign that something else is happening. And this is where we oftentimes detect and refer cases to our sister agencies. So with that, I think, did I hit 2 minutes?
You did a great job, perfectly in time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Evelyn, let's go to you, please.
Thank you, Karen, and hello, everyone. I have been a survivor advocate for about, you can say 10 years plus, and a consultant. I was the first ever White House Advisory Council in 2015 under Obama. And I now work with the Human Trafficking Legal Center as their operation manager and survivor advocate. And what we do at the Human Trafficking Legal Center, we connect survivors to pro bono lawyers that way they can get the legal services that they need. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear Polly, take it away.
Well, you know what I want to say, Karen, is you referenced that I had been with Amtrak, and in 2012, the Department of Transportation and Homeland Security partnered with Amtrak. And at that time, we trained all 20,000 employees in human trafficking and awareness. So I came to APTA with that knowledge of how effective that training can be. So in 2020, when DOT launched the Transportation Leaders Against Human Trafficking as an initiative that brought at that time over 200 organizations from across transportation together to focus on leadership, training, and education, APTA signed that pledge. Paul Scatellas was more than happy to. And then we did the things that you said you were going to do in the pledge, which is we trained all our employees. We've hosted webinars and podcasts. We've had this as a topic at our conferences. We have a resource page with best practices that our intern just updated. We highlight the FTA grant recipients. One of those is Ashton, who works at VTA. In fact, VTA's program was responsible for laws being enacted in California about this topic. And then once again, we partnered with Truckers Against Trafficking and Busing on the Lookout and Safe Place to share survivor stories and awareness training.
Well, I have to say, I got covered in goosebumps personally when you talked about training all 20,000 employees, because that's a big undertaking, but it also speaks to the absolute necessity of being well trained to understand what to look for so that you can help victims or potential victims. So I look forward to diving into that a bit deeper, Polly, and thank you for that, and for highlighting VTA's grant from FTA, because it becomes a small world in this area. And our own Dr. Kesban is working in partnership with VTA on their Not on Transit grant to evaluate programs and best practices. So thanks for highlighting that. Aston, let's go right to you.
Yeah, and you guys right center on my key points here. And that grant that you mentioned from FTA was or it continues to be a cornerstone of our program. and our vision that awareness and training is key. Being able to arm our employees with the tools to recognize the signs of human trafficking is critical. And, right now, all of our VTA employees have been trained to recognize these same signs, but more importantly, how to report it. And that involves our law enforcement, right? So that law enforcement, supportive services, security supportive services do not take those reports lightly. They may initiate an investigation that's deeper than what may just be on the surface to identify syndicates. As we know, some of these behaviors could be occurring on the dark web, and it's an insidious crime, right, that's occurring. And so being able to recognize it, report it, is something that we stress. And these efforts, I think, are ongoing. They'll continue. I myself I've been in this space now for almost 15 years when I started working in Atlanta with a human trafficking task force that was run by the state to try to curtail some of those behaviors, especially in anticipation of the Super Bowl. So I think this is continuing to be a high priority, especially as it connects to other issues that require attention, like homelessness or trauma that individuals experience, mental illness, and all of these things, I think, have some connective tissue. So I think that, the training is key, and my work centers around that as part of our program.
Very good, very robust response. Thank you. And then finally, rounding out this question is Dr. Kesban.
Hi, as an MTI research associate, I have been fortunate enough to be involved with multiple United States Department of Transportation efforts on combating human trafficking in and through transportation. For example, I conducted a USDOT funded research in understanding the role of transportation in combating human trafficking in California, which, as the name suggests, investigates the role of transportation in different stages of human trafficking, both sex and labor trafficking in the state of California. It also addresses the role of both transportation of people as well as transportation of goods made by forced labor. As Dr. Philbrick suggested, mentioned it already, that I'm the co-PI of our partnership with VTA on the FTA Not on Transit grant. I'm also the chair for Forced Labor Working Group and Analytics Working Group member for the National Outreach Survey for Transportation, the first Impact Award recipient under the DOT, which collects frontline data on human trafficking awareness for transportation professionals, survivors, and service providers. The report is supposed to come out actually pretty soon about this USDOT effort also. So I'm really grateful to be part of this amazing number of people on the panel. Thank you so much.
And thank you for that. And to all of our listeners, which we have 421 today, I do see that we have over 99 messages in chat. I assure you that somebody is monitoring that and dropping your questions in the Q&A feature, that I can look at, and we will look at the transcript following our time together. And for one of the last comments that was dropped in, noting that mandatory training on this topic is occurring in California. We do understand that, and we will talk about that a little later, but thank you for highlighting that. So with that, you guys all did a great job staying on time. We're going to delve into a framing question. I will once again call on you, 2 minutes to respond, and then we'll get right to those questions that were submitted by our participants today. So first question for all of you: what can the average individual or someone who works in the transportation industry, but who's not directly involved in anti-human trafficking efforts, do to help protect their communities? Let's start with Aston. You're on mute.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think empowering our ridership is key to safety in general. Of course, we've all heard of the See Something, Say Something campaign, which I think is very important just to increase awareness of your environment while you're on our transit conveyances. But there is another thing that should happen, right? It's see something, say something. How about do something? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that many transit agencies have, we here at VTA have it, I had it at LA Metro, I had it at MARTA, is a way for you to use technology to support your observations. We have VTA alerts. We have a report that is specific to human trafficking. And so you can very easily download the free app, be able to provide a little note, a little description of what you've observed, and that comes right to our security and law enforcement personnel. So we arm the public with an ability to see something and do something immediately that could address what could be some threatening behaviors. And we promote that regularly, and it is part of the security, sort of layered security approach, right? Being able to ingest the observations of the public into what we are doing day to day. Can shift everything from our presence on our system to where we provide, additional technology resources based on what we're getting from the public. And so I think that is one major tool that we need to continue to promote. It's something that I rely on. It's something that I think is essential to us being able to attack this challenge that many transit agencies are continuing to face.
Aston, I did see a question just dropped into chat. What is the name of that app, and is it public? How can we access it?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat if I can. It's called VT Alerts.
VT Alerts.
Yeah, VT Alerts. And so I'll drop that in the chat for those who can see it. And other transit agencies have variations of the same sort of app. So I would encourage all of our listeners and participants today to see if your transit agencies if they have any type of security app or security reporting phone number or hotline, and make sure you lock that information into your phone, because you never know, you might just see something, and it may not be a 911 call, which is very interesting, right? It may not be a 911 call, but it's something that you know what, that doesn't look right. Well, through those pathways of communicating with the transit agency, through the app, through the hotline, through an email, you can provide very valuable information so that we can provide help and that we can become aware of where those challenges are. So I'll put that in the app for those to follow.
Thank you. And Alvarina, can you please capture that? And when you send a link out to the recording, add that app link in so that our participants have easy access to it. All right, Kezban, what do you have to offer from the researcher side?
So actually, Mr. Green already have mentioned some of the very key research findings also, but then I will, repeat them. So one of the biggest actual research says that the most important thing a regular citizen can do is awareness, education, training. That was the most important thing that that come out. So as Mr. Green suggested, like having anything with regard to awareness piece, and then making sure that the riders are, educated themselves about the signs of human trafficking and also how to report them, is the biggest thing that they can help with combating human trafficking. After that, another one is definitely to make sure that they are working with different organizations as much as possible, partnership, and then data collection. So that we can actually figure out what is going on in time, track their trends, and then we can manage our responses accordingly. We all know that this is a changing crime. Traffickers learn and adapt. So we, as the people who are trying to combat human trafficking, have to adapt ourselves also. But then that can only happen if we are in time tracking those trends, so that we can actually change our behavior as well. And then definitely with all these efforts, and I am pretty sure that Evelyn here is going to talk about it, to make sure that everything that we are doing is culturally, linguistically, appropriate. And then we make sure that we put survivors in the center. This was actually one of the research results as well. So that I want to mention that, that we make sure that we learn from our survivors when we are doing any of these efforts, so that they're actually meaningful and then appropriate. So those are kind of the three biggest research outputs that were about how we can help both as transportation personnel as well as regular citizens.
I appreciate that. And I did see one question dropped in that I think is perfect for you, Kezban. So I'm going to go a little out of order and ask you this. When you're looking for signs of human trafficking, how can you tell the difference between a voluntary sex worker, for example, or one who is coerced? What type of things do you look for?
Honestly, so especially from the transportation side, if you're thinking about it, we can look at multiple different things. For example, if you're at the airport, we can think about whether the person is, actually appropriately, prepared for the location that they are traveling. This can be a coat if they're going to a cold place. This can be the number of luggages or those type of things. From, again, this is kind of the outside type of things. Other things, of course, looking at like more whether the person is distracted or not, like emotionally, psychologically, can you figure out that if there is any type of anxiety or any kind of fear that is present with the person? So that can be more indicative of whether it's voluntary versus whether it's coercion, like those type of potentially easier indications as an outside, as a transportation personnel, or like even the citizen can be. These are one of the most common things that we can think of when we are trying to understand the science of human trafficking.
Very good. Thank you for that. And it reminds me of something Aston said, which is see something, say something, but do something. So very good. Evelyn, what can you add to the conversation?
Trying to unmute myself.
There you go.
I think Ashton and Kazam already responded. You really touched very well on saying, for me, the number one is training. And, training, when I say training, making sure that you really understand. Somebody just asked a good question, because a lot of the times when people think of human trafficking, they often just assume sex trafficking. And they also watch the movies and always just think that there are, someone from other countries besides someone that looks like me. So they don't really look, culture is very important, and I feel like if we are talking about identification of trafficking, we have to really focus on labor and sex. And a lot of the time, the word human trafficking automatically just thinks sex, just screams sex. And even the hotline and even the images that you see that are out there will say, oh, this person, so you have to be careful. Like, you have to really be careful with the sign. Training is important, but make sure that you're getting this training from, a diverse, full of people, lived experience expert at myself. And if you are getting the training, also really try to learn the signs, because it is important. You don't want to be, trying to say, hey, I see somebody, that person might not really be the person. And I think as I mentioned something about the airport. I like to use my experience. I came here at age 9, and I got on the plane, and I was not with my trafficker, and I seem like a very happy kid. So sometimes the sign might be different. I seem like a happy kid because I was on my way to come marry Will Smith. That was the promise. So the sign, you really, really have to be careful. And transportation is such an important part of this sector that really needs to have more training in this issue, because a lot of us that are victims, we are transported from one country to another, from one state to another. And not only that, transportation is also plays a big role, because for someone like me, I was trafficked at age 9, and as a domestic servitude, I was taking care of 2 kids, taking those kids to the bus stop. So we also have to look at the, bus drivers. So the bus drivers, me taking 2 kids, at the bus stop, maybe if the bus driver recognized the sign, or maybe the bus driver had some sort of training, probably would have been able to see something, say something like Acton said, and probably would have, called. But transportation is such a big part of this sector that I am so happy we're having this discussion. But very much importantly, we have to get training. That is the most important thing for me. Training is important, and also knowing the different type of trafficking that is involved in this sector. Thank you.
Thank you for raising the discussion of the necessity of a plurality of voices and being culturally and linguistically respectful when we talk about this topic. And I know I'm getting particularly emotional because I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I just can't imagine, Evelyn, what that experience was like, and the strength that you are showing all of us by openly sharing that experience. And I just saw a chat from one of our Caltrans participants thanking you for your courage and for your dedication to making sure we eradicate this problem. Your precious 9-year-old self, I'm holding her right now. So thank you for sharing that. Polly.
Well, so there are several things here, and we do want to confirm that we know that traffickers do use public transit, and that comes from survivors who say that they were taken on buses and rail to facilitate their exploitation. So what I think about mass transit and passenger rail is that it brings many benefits to our community. We provide access to jobs and school, and our agencies are our communities. Our employees live there, they serve and they contribute through food drives and helping those who are homeless. And of course, our agencies during weather events and emergencies transport water. During the pandemic, some provided Wi-Fi, so that, we know that wherever transit goes, communities grow. And it's only fitting then that our employees would want to help individuals be free from human trafficking in their communities. And I think going back to the training is key. And, I can relate to, being at Amtrak, we did the training, you had personnel there, they called up, they said they never knew what it was, but they knew what it was now. And it was somebody who went south during the winter, and then when he would go north, he, according to the employees, was always in the company of minor boys who did not have their identification, didn't make eye contact, didn't have their tickets, and wouldn't look at anybody or talk to anybody. And so we had time there to run his name. He had been previously charged with exploiting minors, and we were able to contact the local police. And so it was those employees just saying, I know something's not right, and reporting it. So going back to what Ashton said, and it's so important what Ashton said about the app, because we just had an employee at APTA be on a train, something happened, she had the number to the transit police, she didn't have the text. So then she had to wait for the perpetrator to get off the train to call, whereas if she'd had the text on her phone, she could have texted real time, because everybody's on their phones all the time, and she may have been able to take a picture of him without him seeing it, or the people that in the case of human trafficking, that the people were with, and sent that to the local authorities or transit agency. Every community that we live in has text to tip. As Ashton said, having that tool ahead of time, so if you see anything that doesn't look right, and I think Ashton and I have in common from law enforcement, we'd rather be called and have it be nothing than have it be that time where you didn't because you weren't sure, and that could have been the deal breaker in getting somebody out of being exploited. So it goes back to what everybody has said, and I think it's okay to have a reoccurring themes, right? That it's training, it's awareness, it's having, knowing who to call and going ahead and calling.
Very good. Thank you for that. And particularly you identifying the fact you'd rather have false alarms than people not reaching out, because every life you save, and you are saving lives, is incredibly valuable. So Paul, bring us home and round out this discussion with your answer, please.
So I'd like to say that since many of our audience are part of the transportation industry and involving a lot of government agencies, I think partnerships is a key, crucial part of that, and transportation agencies have a crucial role in the human trafficking task forces that's around all around the country, but throughout the state. We have many jurisdictions that have human trafficking task forces that are Department of Justice OVC funded. These are very complex, comprehensive human trafficking task forces, and I encourage you to join those task forces, because both you can collaborate, but also have a cross training with each other. And if so, please join the labor subcommittee, because there is so much information that could be shared. I want to say that in transportation, what we oftentimes miss is there's unsafe transportation in many of these instances, unsafe but in such as buses or vans that are used to transport potential victims of labor trafficking. They're looked at just simply as violations. They're looked at as a transportation issue, but deep inside, there's, with workers having no seatbelts or anything of that matter in a van, in a cargo van, that should raise flags. In trucks where the people are being maybe smuggled or transported, these cargo as cargoes. This is something that should be alerted, but also there's also an informal transportation industry that is a large part of this that's really not looked at in many cases. What I mean by that is if you look at folks that are going to the site of work, they often rely on a underground version of Uber or these types of transportations, and these are well known in immigrant communities. But I also want to say that this isn't just related to immigrant communities. Labor trafficking it can occur anywhere. You see kids or selling subscriptions or begging crews all over the country. They're right there by the stops, coming down from the freeways. These are like telltale signs that well, wait a minute, there might be something wrong with this situation. This is where having that partnership with the task forces and your agency, respective agencies, is so important. Also, I just want to focus before I end. There's also sometimes when you see accidents happen, this is where there might be signs of human trafficking, especially when accidents occur where there's workers involved, especially in regions where there's let's say agricultural or other known places. This is sometimes a telltale sign that there's something more that's happening. And also, if let's say teenagers are involved in those types of accidents in certain regions, there tends to be clusters of accidents relating to teenagers. But those are accidents of teenagers are not maybe due to being tired or overworked. It may not necessarily be apparent that these are trafficking or potential trafficking or labor violations. But if you don't see any other signs of let's say drug abuse or anything like that, there might be a potential that they may be just overworked and just tired from that, and it creates a very unsafe condition. And we have and oftentimes see victims, teenagers in traffic accidents being in that condition. So with that, turn it back.
This is a tough topic to address. So I really appreciate the honesty, the transparency, and the emotion you're all putting into your response. Before I get to some of the other questions, I just saw someone drop something into chat. And Polly, this might be a question for you. And it's asking if there's a VTA alert in the broader sense across the industry and across the nation.
Well, there is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And many times when you see the literature from, whoever you're getting yours from, DHS, that's a 1-888-373-7888 number. And so there is the ability to call them and report if you see something. And then, of course, there's another wonderful organization, which is the Polaris Project, which is the nonprofit, non-governmental agency that's mission is to prevent human trafficking in North America, and that's both sex and labor, as we've discussed here. But the number is 1-888-373-7888, and that's for the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And so that would be to report something, and that's also if you're in need. And of course, wonderful staff has just put all that information in there to include that they do have a text ability as well. So thank you for the folks in the background who never get enough credit, Karen, for making these webinars happen. So that information is in the chat box, and I really appreciate that question.
Absolutely. And to all of our participants, we'll make sure that all of those resources are added to the summary email you'll receive with a link to the recording so that you can refer back and utilize those as appropriate. Let me dig in a little bit to the mandatory nationwide training. Polly, I feel like in one of our prior conversations, you talked about the FTA rolling out a mandatory requirement. Can you speak to that, please?
Well, FTA in 2020 did initiate, they had a task force that came up with a number of recommendations, and I see head shaking on that. And then, they wanted agencies to sign the pledge. That's when the funding became available. And then certainly I think that VTA's efforts resulted in a law being passed in California that was referred to earlier. Many agencies, when they're going to host, and this was mentioned earlier, a special event such as the playoffs or the Super Bowl or large concert or the kind of event that brings people together from all over the world. DHS is part of the committees that work to plan that event that Ashton and I have worked on throughout our career. Do highlight this as being very, very important and share the resources with the transit agency that can be used on the system, on buses and trains to go ahead and refer people to the resources, link them to the training. Some people even have videos that are available if you have a system that's capable of doing that, running the videos and the training that FTA has or DHS has, so that when people are coming together from all over the world for this special event, there's a possibility that people are being trafficked, not just in, I think Evelyn would agree here, for the sex trade, but probably also workers are being brought to support those venues and the special event, and they're being exploited as well. So certainly FTA in 2020 encouraged and has recommitted to that. They launched the application process that just closed a while ago to restaff, reinvigorate the task force they had created on this really important topic, and probably to re-energize that toolbox as well. So it is nice to know that this is kind of an evergreen project for DOT and DHS, who once again have FTA's wonderful resources on their webpage. So if you have an agency that doesn't have a big training budget, when we did it at APTA, I facilitated the training, and then we had everybody take the online training that FTA provided.
Very good. Now, this is to any of the panelists today. A question was dropped in. Remember, this is for Caltrans Safety Awareness Week, asking specifically if there was voluntary training programs for all Caltrans employees. So outside of the space of transit, but more broadly for a DOT. I'm opening that up to any one of my 5 experts.
So I'll go first.
Okay.
I'm sure Polly also knows this, but starting in 2012, there was actually governmental training for DOT employees on human trafficking. They are supposed to be trained every 3 years about human trafficking, which kind of includes also, our own California DOT as well. So there is that mandatory training piece. Apart from that, as a researcher, this is more from my researcher background. When I was doing my own research on human trafficking in transportation in California, I had the opportunity to reach out to many employees, including California DOT, and I know that they were very enthusiastic about actually opening other training opportunities, including through us like MCI. So I know that there is a will and there is, interest in actually going above the mandatory requirements, about at least in California, including Caltrans. So.
And I thought that was an interesting point because Karen, like DART is another one of the agencies that's a best practice. And when we've done presentations with them before, that's what they'll tell you is this isn't one and done. So you do training every couple of years. You do have to remind your employees. You get new employees, you want to remind your employees that have been around. And I think that even in the chat box, we've seen people share experiences. So when you have that training, then you have an employee who's able to say, yes, I was a bus operator and I saw that 9-year-old in the neighborhood putting little kids on the bus and she didn't get on. And I called the local police. Or they'll demonstrate something else and share. And I think that just reinforces people's comfort level with reporting themselves. But FTA does have online training, and so does DHS. Of course, this is called the Blue Campaign. So there is training if people work someplace that is not offering it, and they just wanted to take it, or they wanted to have their family members become more aware as well. There's the training out there.
Well, that's very helpful. And I just wanted to point out to the panelists that a lot of chats are being dropped into the chat feature, just thanking you for all of these resources and talking about how important and valuable they are. And I particularly want to highlight one story of how this process works. This is from participant Louise Engel, who is talking about a real life experience that just occurred this winter. Basically, people were reporting potential issues in a residential complex in California. A resident noticed a pattern of young women, large trucks coming onto campus at night and young women coming to and from the trucks. Soon, a federal agency obtained approval from the campus authorities to install cameras in a few public areas, including the hallway, to observe that activity within one unit. They've not heard results by the surveillance activity just yet, but they felt very, very reassured that the government takes quick action to deal with these potential illegal activities. And Paul, I think that really speaks to what you were talking about that collaboration between community, between all levels of government and within transportation specifically being very, very important. So Louise, thank you for taking a moment to share that success story. I think that needs to be applauded. Let's turn now to a next question, which is, who are the current main targets for trafficking? Is there a prototype, for example, by age, race, or any other demographic that's being targeted more than others? And Paul, I saw you were starting to type an answer. Would you like to answer that live?
Yeah, I was gonna say the issue is there is no specific demographics per se, because it should be based on vulnerability, and in labor trafficking, it is hidden in plain sight. And this is one of the things, if you're looking for a illicit act, then that's not human trafficking. That's something else. The illicit act is an illicit act by itself. The human trafficking is a process, and this is sometimes that's why it's so difficult. So you can't just say, hey, this type of industry or this type of work is illicit and therefore they're being trafficked. We need to dig a little deeper on that, and this is where so this is why if you look at the legal definition and legal proof, it is a process that a victim goes through, and we need to dig deep into the victimization process. But with that said, look for vulnerabilities that puts a person in that condition. Usually poor communities or communities of color and especially new immigrant communities are more at risk. And sometimes this is where culturally, linguistically appropriate services in these communities, education, reaching out at these communities, offering services, but also offering preventative measures such as actual good paying jobs where folks are doing, getting that. But some also a telltale sign is that workers might not be directly employed by the company that they are working at. Staffing companies using staffing companies as a middleman. These are sometimes telltale signs of that there might be something else going on. And if you look at sometimes the staffing companies are clustered in communities most at risk, just like check cashing places. They're clustered in at-risk communities. We need to look at things, focus in on the data, but also have appropriate strategy in terms of how do we stabilize communities? How do we we should prioritize in giving stabilizing victims and potential victims first.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Evelyn, I saw you did put your hand up. Would you like to respond as well?
Yeah, I mean, Paul answered it, but just to echo what Paul said, and again, it's definitely vulnerable communities, but a lot of times BIPOC communities. And we miss that in this sector. A lot of times we really mix that the people that suffer from trafficking are people from the BIPOC community, And not only that, I also wanted to just touch a little bit on what Paul mentioned earlier. When we are talking about labor trafficking, yes, a lot of the times it is foreigners, but it's also US citizens. We have a case, I have a colleague, Kendra Ross, that is African-American, that was trafficked by a court, and children, and was going from one place to another. I'll probably have, if one of my colleagues is here, we can share a link and for people can read more about that case. There's so many cases on labor trafficking that are American US citizens as well. So we have to just have this thought of not only focusing on one type or foreigners or anything, but also representation really matters, and it is important. I just going back to echoing that when you are getting this training, make sure you're getting training from all form of trafficking. Representation is so important in this sector that a lot of the times we don't get that. And I say this because when we talk about trafficking, and if you Google human trafficking right now and click on images, you're gonna see the images of the people that are being represented, which is not really 100% true, because like Paul mentioned, it's a vulnerable community, and most of those people in that community are BIPOC community.
Very good. And Shayna from your team did drop a link into that story you just mentioned, Evelyn. And for all of our participants in the viewing audience, if you will, the amazing Albertina Renardi from the MTI staff has been dropping links in and numbers in to all of these different resources that people are highlighting. So please take a look at that chat. Kezban, I see that you have your hand raised. What would you like to contribute?
I just want to piggyback on what Paul and Evelyn mentioned. This actually comes very important when we try to look for supply chains, especially for labor trafficking cases, which we generally don't think about it, but transportation has a huge role also in supply chains. So that might be another avenue for people who are interested in learning labor trafficking to ensure that human trafficking or forced labor through supply chain should be another perspective, and how transportation agencies or other governmental agencies can actually combat human trafficking through supply chains. I just wanted to add that perspective.
Thank you very much. Paul, you're next, and then Aston.
Aston actually was ahead of me.
Oh, well, sorry about that. Aston, you're first.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak very briefly to the question about, is there a particular demographic, if you will? And I do understand Evelyn's point about the uniqueness about this tragedy impacting the BIPOC communities. That's very important. But I want to stress that you won't necessarily have any obvious signs, and which is also a challenge for law enforcement. You have to engage to find what may be evidence of victimization. And that's why it's so important in the training, I think, to, for frontline employees to say hello, to say good morning, to interact, because that might be a communication that will lead you to discover some vulnerabilities, right? Some obvious signs of homelessness, or obvious signs of child abuse, or mental illness, or emotional trauma. And so I think if there is anything that is a common factor amongst the victims, is that there is some sort of underlying vulnerability with those populations. And that is what the predators are utilizing to put them in the trafficking position. There's pressures on money, there's poverty, there's a lack of basic needs and food, and those sort of things, I think, makes them vulnerable to those predatory behaviors. So I just wanted to share that This is one of the challenges for law enforcement. You won't see any obvious signs all the time. Sometimes some things are more obvious, but oftentimes it's a little beneath the surface.
Such a valid point. Thank you. Evelyn, I see your hand, but we'll go to Paul first, please. Paul.
Thanks. Excuse me. I actually wanted to. Evelyn just brought up a very good point, and this is our released from incarceration. Excuse me. Recently, those who've been recently released from incarceration, they're very at risk of being trafficked, since they're very. Excuse me. Oh, I'm sorry.
Bless you, Gesundheit, all of the above. You want us to come back to you, Paul? All right, Evelyn, take it away.
No, thank you. I just want to touch a little bit on what Ashton said. Like, I do agree, especially when it comes to law enforcement, which is why I'm happy in the fact that law enforcement are actually starting to get some sort of training on this issue, but they still fall behind. For some survivors, law enforcement might not be the first thing that they want to go for safety. Like we talk about, safety is very important. And the reason why I said BIPOC, because I did a survey in 2021 on, systemic racism affecting this community. And from that survey, they did mention that, yes, the most people that are vulnerable in this issue was BIPOC people. And then not only that, recently, we also, me, my colleague Finance and Paul, we did a survey on poverty affecting the survivor community issue. And in that survey, it shows, when looking at the response, it really showed that systemic racism is still a big issue. And the people that were struggling, financially were BIPOC community, so I do understand like the underlining and everything, but again, 100% to me, the people that suffer from this issue are people that are from the BIPOC community, and it's not shown a lot and it's not talked about a lot. And we really have to be careful. Like, I love the app, I love everything, but is this app safe? Because my trafficker, being with her, she also had a business that was transporting disabled folks. And the driver, I don't want to go into details, but the driver that was driving, was also part of like issue in my case. So when we are saying training, when we are saying app, when we are saying transportation, the person working in that transportation might also be, no offense, a trafficker, and we have to be careful. I don't want, we have to be really careful, and we really have to take this thing seriously, and I just echo and just say my trafficker owned a transportation business that carried disabled folks, and I worked in that business. I was washing that car, I was charging the radio, and a lot of us are victim of issues of transportation.
Thank you for that perspective. Paul, you look like you're ready to talk now.
Okay, thanks.
We'll come to you next, Polly. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you. Just to go back and answer what I guess there's a lot in the chat that says what's BIPOC. It's BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. That's the acronym. So, but this goes back to what I was. Evelyn brought up a very good point from those who've been recently released from incarceration, and cults and other things. They're most at risk in some cases. People who may be government contractors that's actually contractors for transportation related might be using people who may be most at risk, their workers. So the contractors, when you monitor your contractors, make sure that sometimes many times the people that are released from incarceration have to live in these communal homes, or because they don't have a place to stay, they basically have to basically pay all their money that they earned to these entities, and these entities take advantage of certain things, even public transportation, public contracts. And this is they're getting prevailing wage. They're not getting any of that prevailing wage that they're supposed to be getting. So a lot of the things that the government contracts should also pay attention to potential. This is often overlooked, but Evelyn brought up a good point, because these cults utilize these vulnerabilities and also opportunities that are out there to address some of those issues.
Absolutely. Polly, we'll turn to you now. We only have 4 short minutes left, so let's hear.
I was just going to highlight that juveniles can be at risk too, and that's runaways, and that's what Safe Place really focuses on. And they partner with DART and other transit agencies to offer resources to at-risk youth, because folks leave a situation that's not good. And then, as Ashton was kind of describing, the course of manipulation and grooming that happens. But, we see somebody standing alone at a transit facility, and you might want to just ask how they're doing. I think that went back to what Ashton said, that it never helps to reach out, because you don't know who's vulnerable and in need of assistance.
That dovetails perfectly into a question that we have from one of our participants in the audience, which is, what's the best thing to say to a potential victim? Do you need help? Are you safe? Is there some vernacular that's better than others? Anybody? Evelyn, why don't you take that one?
What was the question again? Sorry, Karen.
Let me pull it up so I can read it specifically. What's a good question to ask a potential victim? Is it, are you okay? Are you safe? Or some other derivative of that?
That's a good question. Again, each victim, each survivor, we're different. First, important, I think I echo cultural understanding. You have to have cultural understanding depending on who you're going to come across. But asking them, giving them the choice, asking them, if they're safe, and again, safety to them might not be you calling law enforcement. As a foreigner, a lot of us might be afraid of getting deported, or a lot of the times also we don't know what the law enforcement, like what's going on there. So really asking them, but looking at them, and then trust. For me, I know that I was not able to trust a lot of people. There was just one person in my situation. I always talk about her, Melanie, on her. She was an attorney on my case, my immigration attorney, but she gave me some sort of reason to trust her by asking me what I need and by asking me, are you okay? And just reassuring that, hey, what happened to you is wrong. This was not supposed to happen. We are here to help you, and just giving them a choice, and don't force your own way of helping them, because the answer to your question, just ask them, but also give them a reason to be able to trust you, because they might not really trust you right away to be able to tell you a lot of things or tell you what they need.
That is a perfect ending. I'm so disappointed to say that with that, our hour together is coming to a close. I know I have an incredibly burning question that I wanted to ask that somebody posed, which is, what do we tell our children to keep them safe? And if you guys have any good responses, put it into chat really quick. But with that, please join me in thanking this phenomenal panel with Paul, Evelyn, Aston, Polly, and Dr. Kesban. You really helped enlighten us, and you gave us actionable intelligence, which will allow us to do our own part in combating this travesty that we've discussed today. As I mentioned earlier, Alvarina Waynardi from the MTI team will be sending out an email with the link to today's recording, as well as information about the resources that are available. We hope you can join us for our next research webinar. It's the Norman Y. Mineta Policy Summit, held in conjunction with the Commonwealth Club of California. It will be a virtual engagement on June 2nd called Getting to Zero Deaths on Our Roadways. Is IJA up to the challenge? We will feature Jennifer Hamady, the chair of the National Transportation Safety Board, as our keynote address, followed by another amazing panel to discuss what we can do. So thank you. I wish you all a wonderful day.